She told me the necklace came from her sister. It didn't, and the man whose name was printed on that receipt had been standing 12 feet from my workshop for 6 years, close enough to borrow my tools, close enough to sit at my table every Christmas. What I found in that boot didn't just end a marriage. It started something I couldn't stop once I'd seen it. My name is Daniel Voss. I restore old furniture in Beaufort, South Carolina, the kind of work where you spend hours with your hands inside something broken, learning exactly where it failed before deciding if it's worth saving. I've been married to Renee for 11 years. I thought I knew every joint and seam of that marriage. I was wrong about almost all of it. Renee had gone to New Orleans for a long weekend with her college friends. A trip she took every October, the same 4 women, the same rented shotgun house in the Marigny. I dropped her at the airport, kissed her goodbye, and spent 4 days sanding a walnut sideboard in my shop, eating gas station sandwiches, being the kind of husband who doesn't think to check anything because checking never occurred to him as necessary. She came home Sunday sunburned, talking about beignets and a jazz club on Frenchman Street. She also came home wearing a necklace I hadn't given her. Thin gold chain, small pearl, tasteful in a way that told me someone had thought about it. When I asked, she said her sister mailed it early for her birthday, because Claire does things like that. Claire doesn't do things like that. Claire forgets actual birthdays. I didn't say anything. I went back to the sideboard. Restoration teaches patience most men don't have. The kind where you sit with a crack for a week before touching it, because rushing a repair only hides the damage instead of fixing it. Monday morning, I found the boot. Renee was out getting coffee with a neighbor. I was moving her closet things for the dehumidifier vent. Ordinary work, nothing suspicious. A receipt slid out, thermal paper from a jewelry counter on Royal Street. Time-stamped the Friday she left, 2 in the afternoon. Her flight left Beaufort at 11 that morning. She couldn't have been on Royal Street unless she never boarded, or someone else bought it and handed it to her that night. The loyalty card printed at the bottom wasn't hers. It was Grant Ashford's from Coastal Millworks, the shop sharing our building's backlot. I photographed everything, put it back exactly as I found it, and went to work on the sideboard. I called my brother Nathan that evening from the dock behind our house, the one I'd rebuilt myself 2 summers ago, planks still smelling faintly of cedar oil. He picked up on the 3rd ring, already half laughing at something before I said a word. "You never call this late," he said. "What's wrong?" I told him. The trip, the necklace, the boot, the receipt, the timestamp that didn't fit, the name that did. I told it the way I'd explain a structural problem in a piece of furniture, plainly, in order, without letting my voice do anything dramatic, because dramatic doesn't fix anything. It just makes noise. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Grant Ashford. From the mill shop?" That's the name on the card. "Dan, you've known that guy since he moved down from Charlotte. He was at your wedding." "I know." "You sure about the dates?" Sure. I'm a furniture restorer, Nathan. I read grain patterns for a living. I know how to read a timestamp." He exhaled slow, the sound carrying through the phone like static. "What are you gonna do?" "I don't know yet. I'm not ready to decide anything until I understand the whole shape of it." "You're not going to just ask her?" "Not yet. Once I ask, it becomes real to her too. Right now, it's only real to me. I want to keep it that way a little longer." He didn't argue. Nathan never argued with me when my voice went flat like that. He just said, "Be careful, Dan. Careful how?" "With yourself, not with her." I hung up and sat on the dock a long while, watching the marsh grass move in the tide, thinking about how long Grant Ashford had been standing 12 feet from my life without me ever once looking sideways. The next morning, I drove to Coastal Millworks under the excuse of returning a router bit I'd borrowed months back. Grant was at the counter, same easy grin, same handshake he always gave a half-second too long. "Danny boy," he said. "Didn't expect you over here." "Needed to return this," I said, setting the bit down. "You didn't have to rush that." "I like to keep things settled," I said. "Unfinished business bothers me." Something in his face shifted, just barely, the flicker of a man recalculating. I smiled and told him to have a good one. I drove home slower than usual, running numbers in my head that had nothing to do with lumber. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and looked up something I hadn't thought about in years. Coastal Millworks ownership structure. and who exactly held the paper on Grant's half of that lease. The lease records took less time to find than I expected. Coastal Millworks operated out of a building owned by a small holding company, and that holding company had exactly one silent partner besides the bank. My own business partner, Walter Pruitt. Walter and I had run Voss and Pruitt Restorations together for 9 years. He handled the money side, the invoices, the vendor contracts, the parts of the business I'd never had patience for. I hadn't known he owned a stake in the building next door. He'd never mentioned it, and I'd never asked, because that's what trust looks like right up until it doesn't. I called him Tuesday evening, kept my voice easy. Didn't know you had a piece of the Millworks building. A pause, half a second too long. Small investment. Years back? Why? No reason. Just came up in some paperwork. You all right, Dan? You sound strange. Fine, I said. Just tired? I wasn't fine. I was doing arithmetic. Walter's silence on the phone told me he already knew something, or suspected something, and hadn't said a word to me about it. 9 years of partnership, and he'd let this sit quiet in the same building where I worked every day. Wednesday, Renee made shrimp and grits for dinner. The good kind. The kind she only makes when she's covering for something. She talked about wanting to repaint the guest room. Sage green, maybe, and asked what I thought. I told her sage green sounded fine. She smiled, relieved. The smile of a woman who'd mistaken my quiet for forgetting. I hadn't forgotten anything. I was just waiting for the whole shape of it to come into view before I touched a single board. That night, after she'd gone to sleep, I sat in my shop with the walnut sideboard half-finished under a drop cloth, and I opened the folder I'd started keeping in the bottom drawer of my workbench. The receipt, the photographs, a printout of the lease filing with Walter's name on it. I added a note about Grant's reaction at the counter that morning, the half-second of recalculation in his face. I thought about my father, who'd taught me the trade, telling me once that you never sand over a crack you haven't found the bottom of, because it always comes back through the finish eventually, uglier than before. Thursday morning, I called an old client of mine, a private investigator named Roy Castellan. I'd built a gun cabinet for 2 years back, a careful, quiet man who didn't ask questions he didn't need answered. I told him what I needed. Dates, locations, whatever existed connecting Renee, Grant, and New Orleans, going back further than one October weekend. How far back you want me to look? He asked. As far as it goes, I said. I want the whole foundation, not just the crack on top. Roy Castellan called me back Saturday morning earlier than I expected. His voice flat in the way of a man who'd found more than he wanted to. You want the short version or the whole thing? He said. Whole thing, start to finish. He told me it wasn't one October weekend. It went back nearly 2 years. Small trips logged under her college friends' names, credit card charges at hotels in Savannah and Wilmington that never matched. The story she'd told me about, staying with Claire. Grant's truck showed up on toll camera records the same days. Same routes, 20 minutes behind her, like two people who'd learned not to travel together, but hadn't learned to stop entirely. I sat with the phone against my ear a long time after Roy stopped talking, looking out at the marsh through my shop window, the tide low and the mud flats exposed and glistening in the morning light. You still there, Dan? Roy asked. I'm here. You want me to keep digging, or you got enough? I've got enough to know where the crack goes, I said. I need one more thing. I need to know if Walter Pruitt knew about any of it. Roy went quiet, then said he'd make a call. He rang back within the hour. Walter had known. Not from the start, but for the better part of a year, ever since Grant had let something slip during a poker night at Walter's place. Half drunk and careless, the way men get when they think everyone at the table is on their side. Walter had said nothing, not to me. Not once, across a year of us sitting in the same office, splitting invoices, discussing which clients to take on next. He'd let me build furniture, 12 feet from the man, sleeping with my wife, and said nothing because Walter Pruitt had never once in 9 years wanted to be the man who brought bad news. That was the second crack. Not just Renee, not just Grant, my own partner. Choosing comfort over honesty. Choosing silence because silence was easier than watching my face take the hit. I didn't call Walter that night. I didn't call Nathan either. I sat in my shop with the folder open under the workbench light, and I thought about the business we'd built together. The clients we shared, the joint account with both our names on it, the lease we co-signed on the shop itself 8 years ago. If Walter had known and said nothing, then Walter had made a choice about what kind of partner he wanted to be, and I was going to make sure he understood. Clearly and specifically, what that choice was going to cost him. I opened my laptop and started reading. Through our partnership, agreement for the first time in years, looking for every clause that mentioned dissolution, buyout, and cause. The partnership agreement was clearer than I remembered. Section 9 covered dissolution for cause, and cause included any material breach of fiduciary duty, any concealment of information materially affecting the business or its partners. Walter had spent a year sitting on knowledge that affected me in every way that mattered, and he'd chosen the shop's quiet rhythm over my right to know. That qualified. I read it 3 times to be sure, the way I'd check a joint before trusting it to hold weight. Sunday morning, I drove to Charleston to see my father's old attorney, a woman named Eleanor Marsh who'd handled our family's business matters since before I could drive. She was 71, silver-haired, sharp as a new blade, and had exactly no patience for people who wasted her time with vague complaints. "Daniel Voss," she said when I sat down across from her desk. "Please tell me this is about a client contract." "It's not." "How bad?" "I need to understand 2 separations at once," I said. "A marriage and a business partnership, both involving the same betrayal from 2 different directions." She took off her glasses, folded them slowly. "Start from the beginning. Don't skip anything." So I laid it out. The necklace, the receipt, Grant Ashford, the 2 years Roy had traced, and then Walter, the silent partner in the Millworks building. The year of knowing and saying nothing. Eleanor listened without interrupting once, the way good lawyers do, letting a client exhaust the whole story before she starts building anything out of it. When I finished, she was quiet a moment. "The marriage is straightforward enough, painful as it is. The partnership is trickier. You'll want an independent audit of the books before anything else. If Walter's been careless with the truth about your wife, I want to know if he's been careless with anything else. You think he's skimmed something?" "I think a man who keeps one secret for a year rarely keeps only one," she said. "Get me an accountant, a forensic one, someone with no ties to your shop or his." I told her I already had a name in mind. A woman Roy had recommended. Thorough and unconnected to Beaufort's small business circles entirely. "Good," Eleanor said. "And Daniel, what do you want the outcome to look like?" "Not legally, in plain terms." I thought about the sideboard sitting half-finished under its drop cloth, and the shop I'd built with my own, hand standing 12 feet from the place where all of this had started. "I want everyone standing in that building to understand exactly what they built on," I said, "and exactly what it costs when the foundation gives out." The forensic accountant's name was Marisol Vance, recommended by Roy as someone thorough, unconnected and immune to small-town pressure. She agreed to meet me Tuesday evening at her office in Bluffton, away from Beaufort's tight circles where everyone knew everyone's business before it was even true. She went through 9 years of Voss and Pruitt restorations, financials in absolute silence for the first hour, glasses low on her nose, pen moving in short, precise strokes across a legal pad. I sat across from her saying nothing, the way I'd learned to sit with a crack in a piece of furniture before deciding how deep it ran. "Your partner has been paying a supplier called Ashford. Supply and finish for the last 14 months, she finally said. Invoices for finishing materials, stains, sealants. Nothing unusual on the surface. What's underneath the surface? Ashford Supply and Finish isn't registered anywhere in South Carolina. I checked 3 databases. It doesn't exist as a business entity. And the invoice amounts don't match any actual deliveries your shop received, according to your own inventory logs." I sat with that a moment. Ashford, Grant's name, laundered through a business that only existed on paper, and Walter had been signing checks to it for over a year. "How much?" I asked. "Just under $60,000, spread out to stay under the threshold that would trigger a bank flag." I thought about Walter across the office we shared, complaining about supplier costs rising, nodding along with me about tightening margins, all while quietly funneling money toward the man sleeping with my wife. Whether Grant knew where the money came from, or whether Walter had simply been buying his silence, or funding something else entirely, didn't change the shape of the wound. Walter had built a second betrayal on top of the first and let me stand 12 feet from both of them for a year, sanding wood, trusting completely. I need this documented, I told Marisol. Everything. Clean enough to hold up if it needs to. It will hold up, she said. I'm thorough, Mr. Voss. That's what you're paying for. I drove home that night past the Millworks building, its windows dark, Grant's truck gone from the lot, and I thought about how long a thing can rot quietly behind a wall before anyone thinks to open it up and look. At home, Renee had left the porch light on for me, a small, ordinary kindness from a woman who had no idea how much daylight I'd already let into the parts of our life she thought were still dark. I turned off the porch light before I went inside. Some things didn't need lighting anymore. I already knew exactly where the ground was. Wednesday, I met with Eleanor Marsh again, this time with Marisol's report in hand. Eleanor read through it twice, slow and unhurried, the way she read everything, and then set it down flat on her desk. This is more than enough for dissolution with cause, she said. It's also enough to open a criminal question if you want to go that route. Diversion of business funds through a shell entity is fraud. Daniel, not just a broken friendship. I don't want prison for Walter, I said. I want him gone from my business, and I want every dollar back that he took with interest on paper, signed and notarized, so there's no argument later. And Grant Ashford? Grant doesn't own anything I can take from him directly, but Coastal Millworks leases its space through Walter's holding company. If Walter's out, the lease terms change. If the lease terms change, Grant's shop stops being convenient anymore. Eleanor allowed herself something close to a smile. You've thought this through like a man drawing a floor plan. That's the only way I know how to think, I said. We spent 2 hours drafting the dissolution notice, the demand for repayment, and a request for an emergency injunction freezing the shared business accounts before Walter had any warning to move money elsewhere. Eleanor said she'd have it filed by Friday morning. Quiet and clean, no press, no drama, just paperwork moving through the system the way paperwork does. Thursday night, Renee brought up New Orleans again, unprompted, asking if I wanted to come with her next October instead of staying behind with the shop every year. She said it looking at the stove, not at me, the tell she'd always had when she was covering something with hopefulness. Maybe, I said. Let's see where we are by then. She looked at me for a second too long, searching for something in my face she didn't find, because I wasn't leaving it there for her to see yet. Not until Friday. That night, I sat in my shop with the walnut sideboard finally finished under fresh varnish. It's grained deep and even, every crack from years of neglect sanded down and sealed properly this time. Not hidden, actually repaired. I ran my hand along the surface and thought about how much slower real restoration is than people expect, and how much faster ruin can move once you stop paying attention. Friday was 4 days away. By then, Eleanor said everything would be signed, filed, and impossible to undo. Friday morning, Eleanor's office filed everything at once. The dissolution notice to Walter, the demand for repayment backed by Marisol's report, the injunction freezing the shared accounts, granted by a judge who read the fraud documentation and signed without hesitation. By 10 in the morning, Walter Pruitt could no longer touch a single dollar in Voss and Pruitt restorations without my signature beside his. He called me 4 times before noon. I let all 4 go to voicemail. Some conversations you have on paper first, so no one can pretend later they misunderstood the terms. I finally called him back at 2, sitting in my truck outside the bank where I'd just opened new accounts under my name alone, the business license transfer already moving through Eleanor's office. Dan, what the hell is this? He said, voice tight, the easy charm gone out of it entirely. It's an audit, Walter. Marisol Vance did it. 14 months of payments to a company called Ashford Supply and Finish that doesn't exist anywhere in this state. Silence on the line, long enough that I could hear him breathing. I can explain, he finally said. You had a year to explain, I said. You explained instead by staying quiet while I stood 12 feet from Grant Ashford every day, trusting both of you completely. That's not, Dan, that's a separate thing entirely. It stopped being separate the minute you started. Paying him with money that belonged to both of us. He didn't have an answer for that. Walter had always been good with charm and terrible with consequences. And for the first time in 9 years, I watched him run out of both at once. The dissolution stands, I said. You'll get formal notice of the buyout terms by Monday. Eleanor's already calculated. What you owe against what the partnership's worth. You'll sign it, or we go to court and let a judge decide. And a judge won't be nearly as generous as I'm being right now." I hung up before he could answer. That evening, I drove to the Millworks building one last time. Not to confront Grant, but simply to look at it. The shop where he'd built his ordinary days 12 feet from mine for 6 years. The lease notice from Walter's holding company would arrive Monday, too, terminating the arrangement inside 90 days, courtesy of new ownership terms Eleanor had structured into the buyout itself. I didn't need to say a single word to Grant Ashford. The building was going to say it for me. Saturday was 3 days away. Renee still didn't know that Saturday was the day everything came home to her. Saturday morning, Renee left for her regular coffee with a neighbor. The same ordinary errand she'd run 100 times, humming something under her breath as she grabbed her keys. I watched her go from the kitchen window and then got to work. I'd already packed most of what mattered 3 days earlier. Quietly, a few boxes at a time in the truck bed under a tarp. Moved to a small rental unit I'd taken out under my name alone. What remained, I organized that morning into clear stacks, labeled by room the way I labeled everything, because chaos serves no one and clarity serves the truth. By the time she came home just past noon, the house looked different. Not ransacked. Ordered. Her things boxed by the front hallway. 16 boxes total. Clean block lettering on each one. Bedroom, closet, bathroom, miscellaneous. She stood in the doorway with her coffee still in hand, keys dangling from 2 fingers, and I watched her face move through the stages I'd expected. Confusion first, then something sharper. "Daniel, what is this?" "I'm being organized," I said. "You've always said I think in straight lines. Figured I'd put it to use. What's going on?" "Talk to me." I gestured to the kitchen table. The one I'd built myself from reclaimed heart pine 8 years ago, and she sat across from me the way she used to when we were still just 2 people sharing a life instead of 2 people finishing one. I laid 3 things on the table between us. First, the photograph of the receipt from Royal Street, time-stamped 2 hours after her flight left Beaufort. Second, a printed summary from Roy Castellan, 2 years of dates and hotel charges under names that weren't hers. Addresses that weren't Claire's. Third, the filed dissolution notice from Voss and Pruitt Restorations. Walter's name on it, and beneath it, a copy of the Ashford supply and finish invoices. $60,000 moved quietly over 14 months. Her face went through something I won't describe in detail, because some things stay private even inside a wreck this size. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "Long enough to understand the whole shape of it," I said. "Not just you and Grant, Walter too. He's known for a year and said nothing. Because saying something cost him nothing until it did. Walter knew?" Her voice cracked on the second word, and for a moment I almost believed the betrayal hurt her too. Someone she'd trusted with dinner, parties and birthdays, finding out and staying silent. "He's out of the business as of Friday," I said. "And Coastal Millworks loses its lease in 90 days. She stared at the papers, then at me, searching for the man she thought she'd married, the one who never noticed anything until it was far too late to matter. She wasn't going to find him. That man was already gone. "Where am I supposed to go?" she said, and it wasn't defiance. Just the flat question of someone standing in the ruins of a life trying to find the door. "That's yours to figure out," I said. "Not mine anymore. Daniel, please, just talk to me. Whatever you're thinking." "I already talked," I said. "To Eleanor Marsh. The divorce petition was filed Thursday. You'll get formal notice this week." She went very still, the coffee cup trembling slightly in her hand before she set it down. "You filed already? Before you even told me you knew?" "I don't do things prematurely," I said. "I wait until every piece is documented so nothing can be argued about later. You taught me that lesson yourself, just not on purpose." My phone buzzed on the table between us. I turned it so she could see the screen. A text from Nathan. "Grant just got served the lease termination notice at the shop. Word's already moving through town." Renee read it upside down, and something in her face folded further inward. The last piece of denial giving out. "You didn't have to destroy everyone," she said quietly. "I didn't destroy anyone," I said. "I just stopped protecting people who never protected me. Grant's shop loses its lease in 90 days. Walter's out of the business, repaying every dollar he stole with interest. And you get to keep the sedan? Half of what's left after the buyout settles. and enough to start over somewhere that isn't 12 feet from any of this. I stood, smoothed my jacket, the way you do when you're trying to leave a room with some dignity left in it. The house stays listed for sale, I said. The heart pine table goes with me. I built that with my own hands, and it's the only thing in this house that was never a lie. I picked up my keys from the counter, the bag already packed and waiting by the door for 3 days. I loved you for 11 years, I said. That was real on my end. Whatever this cost you, I hope it's a lesson you actually keep. I walked out into the Beaufort evening, the marsh air thick and warm, and drove to the small rental unit. I'd already made into something that was mine alone. I didn't look back at the house. A finished restoration doesn't need a second glance. 3 weeks later, Walter's buyout cleared in full. 6 weeks later, Grant's shop closed for good. Unable to find another lease in town after word got around about the shell company. I heard Renee moved to Savannah that spring. I hope she's all right. I mean that. I started building a new table that same spring, smaller, simpler, in a shop that finally belonged to no one but me. Thanks for staying with us till the end. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe for more. This has been the Revenge Hub.